Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. And we're zooming in and focusing in today on really understanding why it's so difficult to move on after an abusive or traumatic relationship. Why is it so hard to move on after a narcissist break up with a romantic or intimate relationship? Or furthermore, why it's so difficult to move on and entered into a mature adulthood after you've been in a relationship with a narcissistic family member. This person could be your soulmate, your intimate partner, your family member, your coworker, but there are a lot of different elements at play when we come to understanding and really understanding why it's so difficult to move on in the first place. And for one, you must, before we get started, I just want to give a huge shout out to those of you who have recently donated to the channel. Thank you so much for your contributions. It's so good to hear from you, the viewers, and to hear that these videos and discussions and support and really diving deep are making a positive influence and impact in your life. So thank you so much for your kind words and your contributions. And yes, absolutely, positively, if the channel here has been a positive resource for you, absolutely positively feel comfortable to participate in the channel. There is a PayPal Donate Now button here on the home page, the About channel, the About page of the Peace and Harmony channel here on YouTube. So I want to really zoom in and focus in because I really do feel through a lot of the discourse and the discussion with the viewers that it's kind of like there's a catch. People are afraid to move on. They're afraid to enter into the fullness of their being. They're afraid to really let go and be happy and to be self-poised, to carry themselves with a kind of perspective and physiology that they want to live in, the sort of perspective. Entering into the relationships or the interests or the jobs that they want to. They feel a constant tugging or a catching, like, you know, there's got to be a catch here to me moving forward in my life. And people are very uncomfortable with moving forward. It can take years, if not decades, to really comprehend and understand the cause that's created this effect in your life. So I really want to kind of dive in and focus in a little bit more in depth on understanding the impact, so that you can once you kind of come to a comprehension, not only intellectually but in a heartfelt, emotional manner, this will make it a lot easier for you to let it go and really sort of separate yourself from the cause that's created this effect in your life, and being able to carry yourself as a whole, compassionate, empathetic, caring, loving human being who has a boundary about themselves and who has a standard about themselves. I always hearken back to that because it's so important. But yet we can say, you know, it's so important to have boundaries. It's so important to have standards. It's so important not to tolerate this. But yet it doesn't really sink in the meaning when you really until you really understand the why, the cause has created this effect of why it's been so difficult to let it go. And it's more than just being enmeshed. It's more than just, you know, having someone else dominate your life and be manipulative and not have the tools, the resources, the clarity, the distance in order to see it. There are a couple other elements at play. And when we look at Lack Kelly and his book In Shift to Freedom, he makes a very good point on a couple of different things. But namely, when you get really stuck on an abusive relationship like this and you're not experiencing freedom, you're not experiencing sort of the letting out of your personal growth, you're not letting out you're not able to exhale and just be comfortable. There's always this nagging feeling that this person has done you wrong and it's doomed to repeat itself again, or you've, you know, kept repeating this same lesson over and over again, either where you're perpetuating the same disappointing, damaging relationships, or furthermore, what ends up happening is after this person has left your life, then your subconscious takes to task basically doing the job for them. So we see the role of self-sabotage, acting in, the self-harm behaviors, the over-drinking, the over-drugging, the overspending, the underemployment, the lack of discipline, all the sort of acting in that can take place after you've been in this sort of relationship. So it's like you're acting in and giving yourself the same lack of love, lack of attention, lack of self-respect that was initially embodied in this one person. So it's like taking that which was outside of you and then repeating the pattern, repeating the same message, repeating the same feeling within yourself again and again and again, so that eventually you begin to do the harm unto yourself, the self-manipulation, the self-deceit, the self-sabotage that this person committed unto you. So it's very important to understand not only the relationship and then how this person has manipulated you and done you wrong, has not treated you with respect, love, kindness, consideration, even though they might tout that they have done the such. When you're in a relationship with a malignant narcissist or a psychopath, these individuals actually crave control, they crave attention, they crave power, and they have a lack of empathy. So you can see, well, then they would perpetuate the lies to serve their own ends, and not being able to really hear or feel or comprehend or understand what it is that they've done. They don't feel like they've done anything wrong. In fact, you should be so grateful to have them in your life, is generally what they're going to tell you. So it's very important for you to understand the personality disorder and the dynamics that is going on with this individual, and then also to understand that the role in a couple of different things, especially that Lack Kelly has mentioned, and particularly that of it's difficult to let go because you're sort of replaying this pattern within you, and it keeps you afraid of looking into the future. Looking into the future meaning defining yourself in a way that's not defined as negatively or a victim by this person. So when we are holding on to the old patterns of thinking, feeling, behaving, and being, it is in essence a holding on to the past. It's holding on to the feelings. It's holding on to the identity. It's holding on to the role. It's holding on to the limitation. It's holding on to that I am so small space. It's holding on to the I can never amount to much space. I can never, develop myself, feel this way, be able to speak this way, be able to feel this way. All those are negative self-validation terms which are set into motion by a manipulative relationship of a covert narcissist or a psychopath. And it's so very damaging because in essence you create a culture or a context that's really developed in your life that you did not create to begin with. You were like the inheritance or heir to this negative feeling. So generally, the body is going to try to seek pleasure. It's not going to try to seek more pain. To seek more pain is a pathology, or it's erroneous or flawed thinking, decision-making choices, or behavior. So it's not really the natural state for someone to want to draw them into more pain. Pain is uncomfortable. Pain is unhappy. Pain makes life difficult. It makes things a struggle. It makes things uneasy. It's not a desirable state. Sure, no pain, no gain. Of course, you do have to be able to have that discipline, but not to the point where it's really debilitating, causing complex post-traumatic stress syndrome, causing, the social anxieties where, you would like to do some things, but you just cannot. In other words, if you were to work on these little things, if you were to know the right tools and information, you would become a whole different person. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that rehabilitation of self, of psychology, of spirit, of internal dialogue, of perspective and awareness that really helps to really, it can come, the breakthrough can come very quickly, or it can take, some time after working through a lot of the videos, doing the work, listening to this, exploring the questions, exploring the recovery journal that we discussed here. It eventually, little by little, but then it'll break open, and then you'll be able to experience this shift into freedom, into personal empowerment, into a self-control where you're able to manage things and not feel uncomfortable having emotional control over things. So it is to understand that once you're kind of gotten into that more advanced stage of healing, is to say, okay, then why is it so difficult to let go? Why is it so difficult to let go of an abusive person? Why is it so difficult to let go of an emotional manipulator? This did not work out. In fact, if I were to ever go back to them, it would be worse. I've done so good at no contact. Why is this so difficult for me to let go? Well, it's to understand that not only is this habitually playing, and replaying itself, but it's to understand that part of this is the unknown and uncertainty of the future. In terms of understanding, well then, what I'm afraid of the future, who would I be, where would I be, where are my roots, where is my foundation without this person? So oftentimes it's very difficult to see this, acknowledge this, validate this, become aware of it, or recognize it and acknowledge it. So once again, it's a growth of awareness, it's a growth of perspective that makes this happen, because we're so used to defining ourselves by the ills, the struggles, the problems that have set this into motion for weeks, years, months, if not decades, that have plagued our hours, that have plagued our moments, that have plagued our holidays, that have plagued forevermore. And until you break the cycle and say no more, I'm now learning and I'm now gravitating towards my own happiness, and I'm surrounding myself with feelings, thoughts, behaviors, choices, and decisions which are positive for me and based on self-positive regard and positive self-bias. In other words, I am good enough. I am lovable. I have positive self-regard, which is a very different feeling than you had experienced from this individual. But that had been repeated for so long, and the importance of it became so looming and had such a precedence to you that it took up more space. It took up more emotional space within you. It basically, took up housing. It took up residence within your soul. And so it's so important to understand that part of the problem is in fact this, and that it can replay itself even after you've decided to go no contact. And of course, time will help you to heal this. That's why it's so important we ask these questions that help break through that identity, that codependent role, that feeling of I am not good enough mindset. It's not just, an attitude or stinking thinking. It's really hardwired into you physiologically. So we talk about the physiological states of being able to hold yourself up, the I am, the astralmations, the getting it all out on the paper, the lessons learned component, the identification component, learning to identify the traits and qualities and dispositions of these types of individuals, and not only why they've done what they've done, but how they've done what they've done and gotten away with it in your life for so long. So it is to understand that it's so very difficult to look ahead and define yourself, because that part of the brain which is involved in that cannot be released or really lived in until you've let go of the fight or flight. And you can only let go of the fight or flight of that constant paranoia, that constant concern, that constant feeling of fear or being criticized or rebuked or attacked, until you really realize that this person is outside of your sphere of influence, that you have mastery over the control. They're no longer, puppeteering you from afar. that they don't have the control switches to your emotions. And we learn this through, free will. We learn this through purging out this in the recovery pages, the recovery date, where we're taking, and asking all the questions of that healed self and giving ourselves a chance to be energized and defining ourselves by the positive states versus the negative definition by the manipulative individual. So we're no longer just defining ourselves by conforming to the standards or negative standards of this person. So it's defining yourself from this internal locus of control, which is founded in positive self-regard, positive unconditional self-regard, self-love, self-care, resensitizing the self. We're really sort of cramming a lot in terms of the work that we do here on the channel. But furthermore, it's to help then free up the fact that you have a lot to look forward to. You deserve better. You deserve better than that maladaptive treatment. In fact, you don't deserve to be somebody's punching bag. I don't care if it's a family member that you were born into. You don't deserve that as a civil human being. So part of growing and maturing is defining yourself all the way, through the beginning stages of your life moving forward, and seeing the champion that you are, the victor that you are, all that you have come through on top, and say, I did it. I am strong. I am resilient. I have an indomitable spirit. You have your spirit. You have your outlook. You have your joy. It's yours to claim it, but it is to say, I cannot be dominated. I have an indomitable spirit. I cannot be bought for a few insults. I cannot be changed by a few hurled comments. I cannot be changed. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. It's really, really kind of going back to that childhood, that childhood state and being like a child, but being playful in the positive sense, and then understanding that you can then monitor and through cognitive awareness, through metacognition, being able to look into your own life from that higher perspective as the adult, raising that sort of, id-like sort of out of control or hurt, giving them strength. I am here for you. Championing the inner child, John Bradshaw. And is to understand that also that the human brain is wired to look at content, not context. So part of healing is really being able to look at the big picture. And that is a state that oftentimes is not experienced, that freedom to look at the big picture. When you're in a relationship with a manipulative individual, someone who's narrowed your point of view, narrowed your screen, like we say, everything is down to the size of a postage stamp and you're missing the big billboard. When you are in a traumatic or abusive relationship, such as we see with a malignant narcissist, a malignant psychopath, someone who has pathological need to control your thoughts, feelings, behavior, self-concept, your identity, to get you into a submissive, broken down state, so that you're always thinking about them. That is the hallmark of a malignant narcissist or a psychopath, is to beat you down silly to the point where all you can do is think about them. They are like, you take on like a tunnel vision and all you see is them. And then you become, through trauma bonding, you experience the Stockholm Syndrome, where then you begin to identify with the abuser and try to pacify them, and then the crazy making, brainwashing, gaslighting, where you then begin to acquiesce to them, and then sort of, as I give the analogy of the pearl, that little grain of sand inside the shell that's such an irritant, i.e. all the negative manipulation, all the negative talk, all the smear campaigns that creates this violation, this irritation. It's gotten, into the shell, so to speak. And then the mollusk, just like the pearl is formed, it sort of gives off this lacquer, which then, covers the little grain of sand and then makes it smooth again, so it's no longer, an irritant. It's just smoothed over like a shell. and you know, and then smooth over, which is really now what we know as a pearl. A very fascinating process. But really, you know, your self-esteem is creating that pearl without the grain of sand. It's being that pure white light. It's being that pure, just generating love, kindness from within without that irritant. It's being able to exist and look at that bigger picture, which has not been annihilated or has not been made small or narrowed down. We hear about like narrow train of thought or, you know, single train of thought. That's oftentimes what happens from these abusive relationships. The pain is so great that all you can see is them. And you can't see a solution or learn to think for oneself, feel for oneself, decide or choose without always having that nagging feeling. And so it is to extricate that, purge that from yourself, and begin to look at life with open arms. Like that Journey song, you know, open arms. And that's just to come into me, you know, allowing your highest self, your highest and positive self-regard and all the wisdom that has, which is what oftentimes people have never even experienced or been allowed to experience in the manipulative relationship. They weren't allowed to live life this way. They weren't allowed to live life free of trauma. They weren't allowed to live life free of fear. They weren't allowed to live life free of pain. They weren't allowed to see the horizon. They weren't allowed to see the big picture. They couldn't see the forest for the trees. They were stuck on that very narrow-minded focus, which is really then all about context. It's all about seeing that person and not seeing the field. It's all about, you know, and so really, you know, your goal should, I guess the message of this video is to understand those couple key components and realize how important it is to open up and begin to come into a relaxed body so you can begin to then breathe in and view the big picture, where you can just get into that safety space where you're open, vulnerable, but yet still protected, where you're still at the helm and still in charge, and being able to dream and navigate your choices, decisions, and feelings from that perspective, where they are not in the picture, they're not in the feeling. You're allowed to let that go, and that's really what mindfulness work is all about. So I would highly recommend, you know, practicing this as an exercise, almost like you would see people going to the gym. Mindfulness exercise, any books on mindfulness teaching you about it, I would highly recommend you learn and take up that skill and really begin to work that. And of course, if you want to look at the book Shift into Freedom by Locke Kelly, it's a very intensive book, but I think you'll find a lot of content there. Although it might be a lot of heavy reading for some, I think it'll also prove very relevant and worthwhile for people such as you, my beautiful empowered harmonizers, have experienced very closely in your life. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.